When you ask people what Nvidia do, they'll probably say, oh, Nvidia, they make chips, right? Nvidia is not actually a chip maker. They are a chip designer.
Wow,
Nvidia
I never knew that.
design the architecture of its GPUs, everything from how cores process data, memory layout, power efficiency. They even design the software stacks that make their hardware useful, but they do not manufacture their own products.
Wow, that's new to me. I don't know if it's new to you guys, but little did I know that Nvidia only designs their chips, which leads me to assume that the manufacturing of their chips is probably done somewhere else, probably done somewhere a lot cheaper. I just wonder where the manufacturing process is happening though. I remember when I used to work for a company as a developer, a lot of the work was outsourced because the cost of labor was a lot cheaper in India. So I worked with a lot of Indians. Dang, I didn't know the same play was happening here too.
The company that actually manufactures the chips for both Apple and Nvidia is TSMC. It's Taiwan Semiconductor. And if you've been living under a rock, there's quite some concern that China will look to take control of Taiwan in the not too distant future. We've seen China building and testing specifically designed new landing ships for just such an occasion. They're building 70 new commercial ferries capable of transporting troops and armored vehicles, scheduled to be completed by the end of 2026.
Okay, so let me get this straight. It seems to me that Apple and Nvidia are heavily dependent on TSMC. TSMC is located in Taiwan. But if China is gearing up to potentially invade Taiwan, that's going to put these tech corporations in a chokehold because they're heavily dependent on just one company to make their chips, which would mean they're going to have to find somewhere else to manufacture those chips. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but that's not going to be easy, especially if you've been dependent on one company for a prolonged period of time. Damn, that's all bad.
But I do find it a little concerning that the entire AI industry is propped up by this one company that manufactures 80 to 90% of its chips in Taiwan.
That's crazy.
And has even admitted that moving its fabs out of Taiwan would be basically impossible. But I'm sure if something happened to TSMC, then Nvidia and Apple could just use another company to make their chips, right? Take their designs to another manufacturer.
I mean, these big tech corporations will have no other choice. They would have to look elsewhere if they want to continue manufacturing these chips. And I know it's hard, but they just got to take that L and rebuild from scratch. It is what it is. What can you do?
This sounds logical in theory, but the reality is it's a much tougher problem than people think because the types of chips that Apple and Nvidia are designing, the 3 and 4 nanometer chip generation, can really only be manufactured by two companies in the world, TSMC and Samsung. Now, for scale, a human hair is around 70,000 nanometers thick. So these transistors are 3,000 to 4,000 times smaller than that. To make transistors that tiny, you need an insane level of precision, and there's only one company on Earth that even makes those machines, ASML, based in the Netherlands. Each one of these machines costs around $300 to $400 million, and there are only a few hundred out there in existence. These machines are owned by various companies around the world, but mostly by TSMC and Samsung.
To any of y'all that are wondering, what is a transistor? Think of it like a maze, and that maze is inside the chip, right? But that maze has walls, correct? So the electricity that flows through the maze is redirected by those walls inside the maze. And the walls inside that maze are transistors. They can be adjusted to however the company wants to redirect the electricity where they want it to go, inside that chip.
But the kicker is, even if you do have one of these $400 million ASML machines, you still can't make the 3 nanometer chip unless you have the decades of experience, the software, and the supply chains that go with it. And then to make these chips at volume, only TSMC and Samsung can do it.
That's the one thing that sucks about experience. You can't buy it. You actually have to go through whatever it may be to gain that experience. There's no other way. I know it sucks.
Okay, so send the orders to Samsung instead. The problem is Samsung, literally the next most advanced foundry, still struggles to match TSMC's production quality. Their 4 nanometer processors had big yield issues, meaning a big chunk of their chips come out defective. And honestly, when you're producing a $30,000 GPU or a $200 iPhone processor at scale, a 20% yield loss is just too painful. Nvidia learned this the hard way during the pandemic because it actually did use Samsung's 8 nanometer process for its RTX 30 series GPUs, but the yields were so poor that Nvidia went straight back to TSMC for the next generation.
I know this for a fact, that if these tech companies can't resolve their tight dependency on TSMC making those chips, it could potentially be a big hit to them on maintaining and advancing their AI models. Because believe it or not, those AI models these tech companies have is completely tied up to physical hardware. That's how I could see the AI bubble burst.
If something happened to TSMC, you can't swap them out. There's no viable backup plan. There isn't a ready-to-go fab to hire in Texas that Nvidia can rent out if the Taiwan situation escalates. And that's what makes this whole AI boom so fragile. TSMC is building chip fabs in Arizona, to be specific, but the thing is, just because you build the factory doesn't mean you can instantly start pumping out the world's most advanced chips. For starters, those new Arizona fabs are years behind schedule. The first one was supposed to start producing chips in 2024, but it's now been pushed back to late this year or even next year. And the second site might not be ready until 2028.
If these big tech companies are trying to build the TSMC adjacent in the US, it's going to be incredibly expensive for them, because they're gonna have to deal with things like manufacturing costs, distribution costs, and also the cost of labor to hire the right engineers with the right experience. That's a whole procedure within itself. That's why I don't see it as financially feasible.
These places look like something straight out of a sci-fi. The air is cleaner than an operating room.
They do.
Workers wear full-body bunny suits to avoid shedding a single speck of dust, because even a single particle can destroy an entire wafer worth millions of dollars. We're talking about facilities that require investments of tens of billions of dollars, require thousands of specially trained workers, and need ultra specialized supply chains of gases, chemicals, and precision machinery that just isn't established locally in the US.
Since I already explained to y'all what a transistor is, all that a wafer is something that the microchip is made out of. And the reason why a small dust particle can ruin the whole operation, first and foremost, you have to account for how small a transistor is. And you guys already know what a transistor does. But if a dust particle interferes, like tampers with the transistor, it will completely break down how a transistor will control the flow of electricity. And that's how one tiny dust particle can ruin everything, which will cost a substantial amount of money to fix. Best believe that.
TSMC's engineers in Taiwan have decades of experience working up to the most advanced 3nm and 4nm nodes. But when they brought that operation to Arizona, they discovered that the local workforce just doesn't have that level of expertise yet. Engineers even had to be flown over from Taiwan just to get things working. You really can't replace that technical know-how overnight. So it's going to take quite some time before that true state-of-the-art manufacturing is happening at scale in the United States.
Which in return, it might affect AI advancement as a whole. I told you guys earlier about how AI is heavily tied to hardware. And if the hardware is not taken care of, then AI is going to be taking a hit. It's not looking too good for them.
The US is absolutely investing in chip manufacturing through the CHIPS Act, and companies like Intel and Samsung and TSMC are all expanding on American soil, but it's not something that can happen in a couple of years. Building up that ecosystem, the people, the materials, the suppliers, the precision tools,
I agree.
Ultimately, it's going to take many, many years, potentially a decade. But TSMC has said for years that if China invaded, they wouldn't be able to continue producing chips for the West under Chinese occupation.
I cannot fathom how several tech companies are dependent on one company located in Taiwan, and it is potentially going to be invaded by China, which would mean it would place China in an advantageous situation. Essentially, China's going to have the final say on what you can and can't do with the chips if they control the country. Wow.
Even if they wanted to, it's just not that simple. As I was saying, their facilities depend on global inputs, high-end machinery, specially designed software from the US, and so on. If China attacked, those supply lines would be instantly cut off. Even if TSMC's fabs weren't destroyed, they'd basically be dead in the water. They wouldn't be able to get the parts, the tools, or the support they'd need to keep running. There are even whispers that Washington has contingency plans to evacuate key Taiwanese engineers or remotely disable the factory tools so that they can't be used by China.
I personally believe it wouldn't happen that easy. You want to know why? Because when it comes to matters pertaining to war, they usually happen out of nowhere. And even though the act itself was premeditated for the attacker, it was not for the country being attacked. And often, more times than not, it usually escalates pretty quickly, meaning the US wouldn't have enough time to react and save the TSMC.
It gives them massive negotiating power and massive leverage. They control a critical ingredient in EVs, batteries, and defense equipment. If they also controlled TSMC, that's a huge economic move, and it would really weaken the West. It's really quite crazy. They take this one little island off their coast and the West is in big trouble. Remove one tiny little island off the coast of China and Nvidia's chips stop, Apple's chips stop, and then you have to deal with the flow-on effect into Amazon, Microsoft, Tesla, Meta, Google to an extent, and they're just the big ones.
This all I'm gonna say, not to get too political, but the last thing you would want is having your business getting caught in some geopolitical crossfire. That's like the ultimate nightmare for any business leader. But let me flip the question back to y'all. Do you care? Do you not care? How do you feel about this? Let me know in the comments. If you respond, I'll give you $1,000. I'm just playing with y'all. But I love y'all, man. Peace and love. I'll see y'all next time.